Chapter 1. The Ominous Discovery. A brisk autumn wind rattled the tall windows of Lantern Hill School as the morning bell tolled. The ancient stone corridors, usually echoing with youthful chatter, lay silent under a veil of dread. It was Inspector Hambleton, gray-haired and solemn, who first alerted me to the calamity. He met me at the grand oak door of the headmaster's study, where I had been summoned with all possible haste. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice tight with tension, "I fear this matter is beyond the ordinary. A pupil has been found, dead in the west wing. We have confirmed it is no accident." I inclined my head gravely, smooth mustache bristling. The school, perched on a hill overlooking the channel, had always been a place of rigid routine and unquestioned discipline. To think that a sinister hand could mar its serenity was disquieting indeed. We walked together down the corridor, passing portraits of Lantern Hill's distinguished alumni scholars, diplomats, and a handful of celebrated artists. The hush of the morning felt ominous, as though the very walls held their breath. At the far end, beyond a flight of narrow stone steps, lay the west wing, a labyrinth of classrooms and dormitories reserved for the older boys of the sixth form. Inspector Hambleton pushed open a heavy oak door, revealing a small, dimly lit dormitory. There, slumped over his desk, was the lifeless form of young Edward Langton, his school cap discarded on the floor. A pool of crimson had soaked into the polished wood, spreading like a dark stain upon the innocence of childhood. I knelt beside the body, observing the neatness of the cause. A single clean-edged wound at the base of the skull spoke of a skilled and possibly practiced strike. The wound was small enough to have been inflicted by an ice pick or a thin stiletto, yet carried the precision of a surgeon's hand. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned chairs or scattered books. "Remarkable precision," I murmured, gently touching the edge of the wound with a gloved finger. One might infer the weapon was handled by a person of refined skill or profound malice. The inspector frowned. "There are whispers among the staff Sir Harold mentioned seeing a shadowy figure outside this window late last night. Yet no one in the dormitory heard any cry for help." I rose and turned to examine the windowsill, noting a faint smear of muddy footprints. They led down the sloping lawn, toward the dense copse that bordered the school grounds. The foliage beyond concealed many secrets in its twilight gloom. Footprints, I observed. The murderer did not linger. He or she fled immediately, confident of leaving no trace. Yet these prints betray a hurried departure in wet ground. We must have them measured and traced. A murmur passed through the assembled masters and prefects, all summoned to the dormitory. Among them, Miss Agnes Cartwright, the young classics tutor, leaned against the wall, pale and trembling. Her large gray eyes were rimmed with fear. "Monsieur Poirot, I found him this morning," she whispered. "I came to collect my notes for the Latin mock exam, and saw him like that." Her voice faltered, eyes filling with tears. I offered her a reassuring nod. "Madame, tell me everything you recall, every detail, however trivial you may think it. In cases of this gravity, no observation is too small." She inhaled shakily. I arrived at 5:45. The sky was still dark, but I thought I heard the low hum of school lights. The dormitory was locked. Mr. Peters, the matron, gave me the key. When I entered, the lamp was still alight. "And the window," she pointed. "It was slightly ajar, though last night Sir Harold insisted he secured it." I turned back to the open window. A faint breeze stirred the heavy drapes. The sill bore the imprint of a cuffed sleeve. The creature of the night had not been careful to avoid contact. "Monsieur Poirot, what do you think happened?" asked the inspector, voice heavy with expectation. I paused, surveying the assembled faces masters in tweed jackets, prefects in immaculate blazers, and the trembling Miss Cartwright. each appearance a mask. Below the surface could lurk guilt or innocence. "We have here a crime of professional precision," I said at last. "The murderer struck swiftly, with knowledge of anatomy, and left with calculation. Yet in doing so, he or she overlooked the simplest of clues: footprints, a disturbed cuff, a window ajar. We shall follow these threads, one by one, until the tapestry of this tragedy is fully unraveled." As the dawn light crept into the room, I straightened my coat and adjusted my tie. Lantern Hill School would not long harbor a murderer in its midst. With the little gray cells at work, the truth would soon emerge from the shadows. Chapter 2. Whispers beyond the walls. The following morning, the sky was a sullen gray, and a damp mist clung to the spires of Lantern Hill School like a warning. Monsieur Poirot rose before breakfast, his methods as precise as always. While the other masters busied themselves with lessons and examinations, he descended into the shadowed archways of the lower quad, seeking clues untainted by midday chatter. Inspector Hambleton joined him at the ancient stone fountain, its water frozen in mid-drip by the chill. "Monsieur," the inspector began, "we have examined the dormitory thoroughly. Apart from the footprints leading toward the copse, nothing else significant emerged. The other boys were asleep and heard nothing. It seems the killer's approach was as silent as death itself." Poirot regarded the fountain's mossy rim. "Silence can be purchased at a price, mon ami. Let us then interview those who patrol these halls each night: Mr. Peters, the matron responsible for locks, and Sir Harold, who logs late study requests. Their testimony may illuminate whether our murderer struck opportunely or by inside knowledge." They first sought Mr. Peters in the domestic wing. The stout matron bustled in her cap and apron, cheeks flushed by the scullery fire. She offered tea with trembling hands. "I secured every dormitory door before retiring," she declared firmly. Each latch clicked distinctly. I counted them. Edward's room was locked until Miss Cartwright arrived. She paused over her cup. Yet when I returned at dawn to fetch towels, the West Wing corridor was unnaturally quiet. No flicker of candlelight. Quite odd. "What of the keys?" Poirot asked, tilting his cup to observe the steep angle of the pour. "Were any unaccounted for?" Mr. Peters dabbed her handkerchief. "I keep 2 sets, one for myself, one for the headmaster. Sir Harold sometimes borrows a set if there's a late request, but he always signs the ledger." She opened a small notebook. "He signed out the key to 6th form dorms at 5:30 yesterday, citing extra Latin tutoring for Miss Cartwright's group." Poirot set down his cup to note the coincidence. "Interesting," he murmured. "And Miss Cartwright denies any late-night meeting with Edward?" "She says she arrived early this morning," Mr. Peters confirmed. "No entries in the log suggest otherwise." Next, they found Sir Harold in his study, a spacious room lined with leather-bound volumes. He stood before a polished desk, polishing a silver inkwell. At Poirot's entrance, he bowed. "Gentlemen, whatever I can tell you, Sir Harold, you secured the West Wing last night?" Poirot prompted that the elderly master nodded. "Yes, at precisely 10 o'clock. Lights were extinguished in all dormitories, except the seniors' common room. I personally walked the corridor twice." He frowned. "I saw nothing unusual save a flicker of candlelight in the window of the old chapel." Poirot raised a gloved finger. "The chapel? It is unused since the renovations last year." "Precisely," Sir Harold said uneasily. "That light should not have been there. I presumed it was a reflection of a passing coach lantern outside. But now—" He trailed off, nervously glancing at the inkwell. The inspector exchanged a glance with Poirot. "Monsieur, may we inspect this chapel?" By mid-morning, the trio stood before the chapel's heavy oak doors. Vines crept over the stone arch, and the doors bore intricate carving of angels and vines, their faces weathered by time. Sir Harold pushed them open with surprising effort. Inside, the vaulted ceiling rose above rows of empty pews, and at the far end, a small alcove held a lectern. It was there that Poirot crouched to examine a fresh smear of muddy, footprints identical in tread to those in Edward's dormitory. They led to a narrow side door, cracked open just enough for a slender figure to slip through. "Monsieur Poirot," said the inspector, pointing to the door, "this leads into the copse." "Oui," Poirot agreed. "Our killer uses the chapel as a secret passage, a hidden corridor between wings. He or she knows the school's architecture intimately. We must deduce who among our suspects possesses such knowledge." They stepped outside into the mist-shrouded lawn. The footprints continued beyond the chapel, their path bisected by the school's boundary fence. There, the tracks vanished among the brambles. Poirot studied the ground with keen eyes. "Observe," he said softly. "The soil here is soft or recently watered. The gardener must have tended this patch within the last 24 hours. Only he and the caretaker frequent this zone. We must question them both." Returning to the main building, Poirot paused in the corridor. Portraits of former headmasters gazed down upon him. A crime is a tapestry woven of motive, means, and opportunity, he told the inspector. Thus far, we have motive or at least opportunity for several. Miss Cartwright, whose Latin group depended on Edward's expertise. Sir Harold, who may have feared exposure of long-kept school secrets. Mr. Peters, with unrivaled access to keys, and now the gardener or caretaker, who know every inch of these grounds. Inspector Hamilton nodded. "Shall we interview the gardening staff next?" "Mais oui," Poirot said, smoothing his coat with satisfaction. "But first, we shall examine Edward's personal effects. I suspect his desk held clues, perhaps a journal or folded letter, that may reveal why someone silenced him." With that, he led the way back into the school, determined to uncover the heart of the tragedy at Lantern Hill School. Chapter 3. The Gardener's Path. Afternoon sun emerged reluctantly from behind the gathering clouds as Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Hamilton, made their way across the dew-soaked quadrangle toward the gardener's shed. The soft crunch of gravel underfoot and the faint tongue of compost in the air signaled their arrival in the walled kitchen garden. Rows of late-summer chrysanthemums and ripening apple trees bordered the narrow path, while beyond, the ornate glass panes of the orchid house glinted in the shifting light. Here, they found Mr. Alfred Clark, the head gardener, stooped over a hercules clump of soil near the herbaceous border. His weathered face, framed by a shock of gray hair and flecks of green, looked up with polite apprehension as Poirot approached. "Good afternoon, Monsieur Poirot, Inspector," Clark said, wiping his hands on a ragged sleeve. "I gather you wish to question me." "Precisely, Monsieur," Poirot responded calmly. "Your footprints led us here from the chapel. Pray tell, when did you last tend this section of the grounds?" Clark straightened and glanced at the damp earth. "Must have been early yesterday morning, around dawn. I had just finished watering the begonias when Mr. Peters sent me to prune the rose arches near the north boundary." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And did anyone accompany you? Or did you notice any unusual comings or goings at that hour?" The gardener shook his head. "No, sir. Lantern Hill is asleep at that hour. Only the caretaker crosses here to check the pumps once or twice a week. I saw him yesterday, but not until mid-morning." "Mid-morning, you say?" The inspector interjected. "Our prints suggest the killer passed through here closer to 5:30, before Miss Cartwright's arrival. Does your assistant usually come before then?" Clark hesitated. "No. Gerald is more of a morning man, but he sometimes arrives early when I have extra work. Yesterday, though, he was late. I noted it when I discovered a broken spade handle near the north fence." "A broken spade handle?" Poirot repeated, raising an eyebrow. And where might this spade be now? Locked in the shed, Clark said, leading them to a small outbuilding. He unlocked the door with a jangling ring of keys and revealed a tidy array of tools hung on pegboards. One spade, its wooden shaft jagged where a clean break had occurred, caught Poirot's attention. "Observe the fracture," Poirot said softly, pressing a gloved finger to the splintered wood. "This break is recent, perhaps within hours of the crime. It seems our perpetrator struck the ground or something sturdy to break the handle intentionally." Inspector Hambleton frowned. "But why? To eliminate evidence? Or as a secondary weapon?" Poirot considered. "An ingenious misdirection, perhaps. A gardener's tool can be wielded with fatal force, yet would not leave the telltale puncture wound we saw on Edward's skull. Breaking the handle renders the tool useless and forces a more precise weapon." Clark paled. I don't understand." "You need not fear, monsieur," Poirot assured him. "You are not our primary suspect yet. But I must ask, have you ever seen Edward Langton in the greenhouse or shed after dusk?" The gardener's eyes flicked to the glass panes of the orchid house. "Only once a week ago. He borrowed water to polish his violin bridge," he said. "He was to meet someone there, but he refused to tell me who." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Your insight is invaluable, monsieur. And what of this assistant Gerald? He was absent during your dawn rounds, yes?" Clark nodded. "Yes. He called in sick with a fever. He lives in the caretaker's cottage beyond the copse." "I haven't seen him since Tuesday." "Then we must speak with Gerald," Poirot declared. "But first, let us consider Edward's desk. I believe his polished violin bridge held a hidden inscription, perhaps a clue to the one he met in the nursery of plants." They bid farewell to Clark and hurried back through the curling tendrils of mist toward the main building. In Edward's dormitory, the little silver violin bridge now in Poirot's possession glimmered under the electric lamp. Engraved in near-invisible script were the letters G.C., intertwined with a small lily motif. "G.C.?" Poirot mused. "Gardener Clark? Or Gerald Clark, the assistant? And the lily, did it bloom in the orchid house?" The murderer arranged a meeting here, where knowledge of seldom-walked paths offered sanctuary. Inspector Hambleton studied the etching. "You think Edward discovered a rendezvous between his killer and another, and tried to leave a clue? But lily? They symbolize innocence. Why include that?" "But the lily is also the emblem of Lantern Hill's crest," Poirot reminded. "Him, a mark of belonging. Edward confided in someone he trusted, perhaps naively. He did not foresee betrayal." As rain began to patter against the leaded windows, Poirot rose, cradling the violin bridge. "We have a name and a path. Gerald. Clark's absence, the broken spade, the chapel corridor, all signs point through the gardener's territory. Tomorrow we will seek Gerald at the caretaker's cottage. For now, we must rest our observations and prepare to corner our suspect." The inspector nodded, determination replacing fatigue. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. Tomorrow, at first light." And with that, the two detectives departed, leaving behind the hushed dormitory and the silent whisper of clues yet to be fully revealed. Chapter 4. The cottage confrontation. The next morning, a pale sun rose above Lantern Hill School, casting long shadows across the dew-dappled lawn. Monsieur Poirot and Inspector Hambleton set out at dawn, crossing the copse by the narrow path revealed in the chapel. Bent branches snapped underfoot, and the scent of damp earth hung in the chill air, but the detectives pressed on, intent on reaching the caretaker's cottage before Gerald Clark could slip away. At the edge of the woodland, just beyond a rusted iron gate, stood the modest stone cottage. Smoke curled from its chimney, and a small vegetable garden lay fenced at the side. A solitary rose bush, its petals blackened by frost, nodded forlornly beside the front door. Inspector Hambleton rapped crisply, and a moment later the door creaked. Open. Gerald Clark appeared, tall, thin, and pallid, his cheeks sunken and eyes hollow. He wore a threadbare cardigan and trousers stained with soil. At the sight of the detectives, he recoiled, clutching the doorframe. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector. I, his voice faltered. Poirot stepped forward, hands calmly clasped behind his back. Monsieur Clark, we have questions regarding the death of Edward Langton. Pray, do not be alarmed. You are not yet under arrest. We simply seek your account of recent events. Gerald's lips trembled. I was ill, as Mr. Clark, my uncle, said. Fever kept me in bed yesterday. I haven't left this cottage since Tuesday. Yet muddy footprints matching those in the chapel and dormitory were found in your uncle's garden yesterday at dawn, Poirot observed, his eyes narrowing slightly. And your absence from the grounds during that time is curious. The young man's gaze darted to the rose bush. I went to fetch water for my uncle's roses early yesterday. I thought perhaps, but I did not hurt Edward. Inspector Hambleton produced a sketch of the broken spade handle. Explain this, he said, handing it to Gerald. Gerald's hand shook as he took the drawing. His face drained further of color. I broke that spade by accident, he stammered. I was digging a trench for the new rose trellis and struck a buried stone. The handle snapped. I intended to replace it before anyone noticed. Poirot studied him thoughtfully. Accidentally on Wednesday, but the fracture appears fresh, and Mr. Clark testified that Gerald was absent when the roses were tended at dawn. Moreover, the spade in the shed remains unbroken, meaning you must have hidden the damaged tool. Why conceal it? Gerald's gaze fell. I panicked. Ever since Edward found me in the orchid house, asking questions, I feared my uncle would blame me for the broken trellis. So I hid the handle in the chapel alcove until I could mend it. The chapel? Poirot repeated. Is that why footprints led there? Gerald swallowed. I went to retrieve the handle last night, but there was someone else there. They saw me and I ran. I didn't stop to ask who it was. And you did not tell your uncle because, the inspector prompted. My uncle. He drinks, Gerald whispered. When? He's drunk. He rants about school secrets, and he scares me. I couldn't bear to face him. Poirot guided Gerald to a wooden bench by the gate. Mon ami, your fear has no bearing on the death of Edward Langton. You may have hid evidence, but you did not kill him. Gerald's shoulders slumped. Then who? I want to help, monsieur. Edward and I were friends. He insisted on meeting someone here, someone he trusted with a secret. He showed me a folded note with GC and a lily motif. I thought it meant me and the roses. The detective's small gray cells whirred. Yes, the inscription on. The violin bridge. But Edward's clue pointed to someone else, someone with the same initials and access to Lily. Gerald studied Poirot. My uncle's initials are a C, but there's a Gaines Tudor Gavin Carter. He coaches the 6th form at Lantern Hill and lives in quarters near the gymnasium. He wears Lily on his blazer badge. At this, Inspector Hambleton patted Gerald's shoulder. A valuable lead, monsieur. Thank you. Poirot rose, adjusting. His cravat, indeed. We must determine whether Mr. Carter used this secret passagetto, arrange a meeting with Edward, and in a moment of fear or anger, struck him down with a hidden stiletto, explaining the surgical wound. Gerald nodded, relief and sorrow mingling in his eyes. I'll do anything to help find the truth. Excellent, Poirot sighed. But first, let us return to Lantern Hill and question Mr. Carter. The hour grows late, and there are other suspects to clear. You may go home, Monsieur Clark, but remain within reach of our inquiries. As Gerald retreated into his Cottage, Poirot, and the inspector set off down the wooded path. Lantern Hill School loomed ahead, stone towers bathed in morning light. The hidden corridors, masked motives, and silent whispers waited within. Chapter by chapter, the tapestry of this tragedy was unraveling, and soon the murderer would be revealed. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Gymnasium. The late morning bells rang through Lantern Hill School, signaling the end of lessons and the beginning of afternoon study. Monsieur Poirot and Inspector Hamilton descended the broad stone staircase toward the gymnasium, where Gavin Carter's quarters awaited. The corridor, normally alive with echoing footsteps and boisterous laughter, felt subdued, aware, perhaps, of looming inquiry. They found Mr. Carter polishing his whistle in the small sitting room adjoining the gym. Tall and athletic, with a precisely trimmed mustache that echoed Poirot's own, he looked up in surprise. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector," he greeted politely, though his eyes flickered with unease. "To what do I owe this unexpected call?" Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur Carter, may we speak with you regarding the death of Edward Langton? We seek only the truth, and I trust you will assist us fully." Carter's posture stiffened. "Of course. I was shocked to hear of Edward's demise. He was a promising student and a talented violinist." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "Yet it seems Edward suspected a secret liaison, a rendezvous arranged through these passages," he tapped his temple, "and believed the culprit bore your initials." He produced a sketch of the engraved violin bridge. "G.C. intertwined with a lily motif, your school badge." The blood drained from Carter's face. I never met him in secret. We had no personal dealings beyond sports tuition." "Inspector." Hamilton leaned forward. "Monsieur Clark pointed us to you, citing your quarters near the gym and the lily emblem. Moreover, muddy footprints identical to those at the crime scene were found in the Orchid House and Chapel locations known only to staff." "You moved through these areas?" Carter swallowed. "Occasionally, yes. I enter the chapel to retrieve equipment stored for the drama club, and I walk past the Orchid House en route to my quarters." He paused, but never after hours. Poirot studied him, noting a faint smudge of earth on Carter's cuff. "This dirt recent, I think. It matches the soil from the kitchen garden, does it not?" Carter glanced at the cuff, then hurried to brush it away. I passed through there this morning to fetch a shuttlecock that rolled under the flower beds." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A plausible explanation, yet Edward died before dawn. If you were in the grounds at that hour, you would have needed a key. Mr. Peters confirms you signed for the sixth form key yesterday evening." Carter's throat tightened. "I did borrow it for evening drills in the quad. The lock requires it." He produced a silver key from his pocket. "See?" "Very well," Poirot conceded, accepting the key gingerly. "Yet the wound on Edward's skull was inflicted by an instrument far more discreet than a spade or cricket bat, a stadier, or ice pick. Where might one hide such a weapon?" The question hung in the air. Carter shook his head. "I have no such item, monsieur. I carry only whistles and stopwatch." Inspector Hamilton exchanged a glance with Poirot. "We shall verify your movements. But tell me, Mr. Carter, was Edward troubled by someone? Did he confide in you?" Carter's gaze softened. "He spoke of receiving anonymous notes requests to meet at odd hours. He thought it was a prank at first, but the last message bore the lily symbol. He whispered to me in confidence that he feared for his life." "Did he show you these notes?" Poirot asked. "He tore them up, too frightened to preserve them. He said he would reconstruct them later, but—" Carter's voice trailed off, haunted. Poirot rose, adjusting his cravat. "A wise decision to destroy incriminating evidence, though perhaps unwise if one intends to solve the mystery." He placed the key on the table. "We will continue our inquiries elsewhere." But know this, monsieur. If you are innocent, your cooperation will clear your name swiftly." Carter exhaled, relief mingled with lingering fear. "I will do whatever I can to help." As they departed, Poirot cast a final glance into the gymnasium, where ropes and mats lay idle. "Our suspect is elusive," he murmured. "He or she moves through shadows, most likely someone with unchallenged nocturnal access." Inspector Hambleton frowned. "Who else remains on our list?" "Sir Harold, Mr. Peters, Miss Cartwright. And now you've cleared Gerald Clark and Gavin Carter." "True," Poirot replied, "yet motives still abound. Sir Harold's secret chapel vigil, Mr. Peters's meticulous key records, Miss Cartwright's early arrival. Each action conceals a thread. We must tie them together." They emerged. Into the growing dusk, the school's battlements dark against the sky. Lantern Hill School awaited its reckoning, and with each secret passage uncovered, the tapestry of tragedy grew more vivid. Soon the final strand would be found, and the murderer brought to light. Chapter 6. The Tutor's Secret. The following afternoon, a restless quiet had settled upon Lantern Hill School. Monsieur Poirot, his little gray cells busily at work, made his way to the classics classroom, where Miss Agnes Cartwright conducted her Latin tutorial. The polished floors reflected the high windows, and the scent of chalk mixed with the faint aroma of old parchment. Inside, the young tutor stood by a wide oak desk, rearranging her notes with trembling fingers. Her gray eyes lit with surprise, a trace of apprehension, when Poirot entered. "Miss Cartwright," Poirot began, inclining his head politely, "I trust you have had time to reflect upon our inquiries. I wish to discuss Edward Langton's final interactions, particularly those concerning his studies in Latin." She swallowed and gestured toward a row of empty desks. "Monsieur Poirot, I am still in shock. Edward was an impeccable student. He arrived for our tutorial at precisely 5:30 each afternoon. He never complained." Her voice wavered. "Last evening he did not come. I waited until 6, then sent Gerald to inquire." Poirot observed her closely, noting the slight reddening at her temples. "And what did Gerald report?" Miss Cartwright hesitated. "He said Edward was not in the dormitory. I feared he had been delayed in the gymnasium or the chapel. I arranged to meet him by the fountain at first light, but instead—" She broke off, eyes moist. "You found him dead," Poirot finished gently. "I am sorry." Yet Edward mentioned receiving notes, urging him to meet someone who understands the nuances of classical text. He believed the sender had knowledge of Latin beyond the pupil's grasp. "Do you recall any colleague with such erudition?" She bit her lip. "Sir Harold quotes Ovid from memory. Mr. Peters can translate Virgil's Georgics. But only one other teacher, our headmaster, Dr. Harrington, has the requisite depth." Her gaze flicked away. He sometimes tutors Edward privately after school." The inspector, who had joined them, narrowed his eyes. "Dr. Harrington has motive, perhaps. Yet why entice Edward with classical riddles? And then kill him?" "Miss—" Cartwright looked stricken. "I cannot fathom it." Edward admired Dr. Harrington. He wrote a paper on Horace under his guidance. She paused and drew a folded piece of paper from her blouse pocket, unfolding it with trembling fingers. "I found this among Edward's discarded notes. He intended to confront someone with it, a poem by Catullus, lines about betrayal. He wrote the name A.C. beneath it." Poirot's mustache quivered. "A.C.," he repeated. "You, Miss Cartwright, Agnes Cartwright. Did Edward hint at suspecting you?" She pressed the paper to her chest. No. He believed the poem referred to another, Amica Carissima, a close friend. He wrote A.C., but scratched it out, unsure whose initials matched. I thought it was Gerald or Gavin Carter. It never crossed my mind that it might be my own." She shivered. I kept the note, hoping to ask him today. Yet he never revealed his thoughts, Poirot said. Miss Cartwright, you arrived early this morning to the dormitory. You say it was to collect notes, but Mr. Peters's ledger shows you signed out the key at 5 o'clock. That was before Gerald's report. Why so early, unless you had other business? Tears welled in her eyes. I wanted to find Edward's journal. He promised to give it to me. It contained drafts of his poetic translations. I feared fears of losing our friendship made me anxious. I thought if I secured the journal, I could help him. Her voice cracked. I would never harm him. Poirot studied her profile, an understandable motive protecting a pupil's work. However, your glove, this one. He held up a single white glove spotted with a tiny smear of mud. Was found in the chapel alcove. It bears the same soil as the gardener's plot. Miss Cartwright looked down. Her fingers clenched reflexively against her skirt. I must have dropped it when I entered the chapel. Edward and I planned to meet there to study the poem. He said it was the only place private enough. Her breath caught. When I realized he never came, I panicked and left without looking. The inspector exchanged a glance with Poirot. Your account fits, but your admission places you at the scene. Yet the wound on Edward's skull required a precision instrument. You, Miss Cartwright, and Edward both lacked such a weapon. She nodded fervently. I own no weapon, only pens and parchments. Poirot folded his arms, pacing slowly by the blackboard. Miss Cartwright, you had opportunity, yet no means. Others possessed. The means Dr. Harrington, perhaps, or Sir Harold. But Edward's clue AC and the lily pointed to Gerald Clark or Gavin Carter before. Now we see it could also signify Agnes Cartwright, whose familial crest features lily. Miss Cartwright covered her face. I never thought. As long as Edward's true clue remains ambiguous, Poirot concluded, we must widen our circle. We shall question Dr. Harrington and Sir Harold next. Pray remain available, Miss Cartwright. Your honesty aids us greatly. She nodded, relief and distress mingling. I will help in any way I can. With that, Poirot and the inspector departed, leaving Miss Cartwright alone among the Latin declensions, her secret laid bare under the ancient verses. The web of suspicion tightened, and Lantern Hill's true culprit drew ever closer to exposure. Chapter 7. Shadows of Authority. Hush of late afternoon had settled upon Lantern Hill School when Monsieur Poirot and Inspector Hambleton made their way to the headmaster's study. Dr. Reginald Harrington's chambers occupied the uppermost floor of the main tower, accessible only by a narrow spiral staircase of worn stone. As they climbed, each step echoed like a drumbeat, warning them that an austere presence awaited. At the ornate oak door, Poirot paused to smooth his coat, then rapped gently. A moment later, the headmaster's voice, calm and deliberate, bade them enter. Inside, Dr. Harrington stood behind a massive mahogany desk piled with manuscripts and lecture notes. His kindly face, framed by silver-rimmed spectacles, betrayed neither surprise nor alarm at the detective's arrival. He inclined his head in greeting. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, I understand you seek answers to a most tragic event. Pray, sit. The room was lined with shelves of classical texts and medical tomes, an unusual combination, hinting at a man of broad learning. Between 2 volumes of Galen lay a small velvet case, closed but within easy reach. Poirot seated himself, deliberately, in a high-backed chair. Dr. Harrington, you tutored Edward Langton privately in both Latin and human anatomy. He admired your knowledge of the Catullus lines about trust and treachery. Tell me, did he confide any concerns to you? The headmaster's expression softened. Edward was a bright student, eager to learn. Last week he questioned some anatomical drawings. He gestured to an open atlas on the desk, seeking clarity on the cranial sutures. I suspect he puzzled over the precise mechanics of a puncture wound. He paused. He never hinted at fear of any person. The inspector leaned forward. Yet you were among the few with both anatomical expertise and midnight access to the chapel corridor. Footprints were found near these alcoves and in the greenhouse, places you pass through regularly. Dr. Harrington adjusted his spectacles. I confess I entered the chapel after midnight to pray for my ailing wife. She resides in the infirmary, and I place a candle upon the altar each evening. He indicated a small stack of wax drippings still warm beneath the lectern. You may verify with the infirmary staff. Poirot rose to inspect the velvet case. With measured grace, he lifted the lid, revealing a slender silver stiletto engraved with a lily motif. The headmaster's eyes flickered. That is my late father's letter opener, he murmured. I use it to break the seal of my personal correspondence. Poirot noted the blade's slight tarnish but pristine edge, evidence of careful polishing. It matches the shape of the wound on Edward's skull. Convenient for opening letters, yet capable of delivering a precise blow. Dr. Harrington paled. Monsieur, I assure you, I have never used it for harm. But the lily emblem, Poirot continued, tracing its curves with a gloved finger, echoes the crest on your signet ring. Edward's final message GC or a coup may well have referred to you. Agab Christos, etched in Greek, meaning beloved master. He could have mistaken initials. The headmaster closed the case with a deliberate click. A tragic misunderstanding, he whispered. But I loved Edward as a son. His voice trembled. Having observed every nuance, Poirot bowed and excused himself. Outside, the inspector turned to him. Shall we confront Sir Harold next? Poirot nodded. Let us seek the man who patrols the corridors and guards the chapel doors. They descended the tower and crossed the cloister towards Sir Harold's quarters in the east wing. The old scholar stood before the chapel window, his silhouette framed by the fading light. When he perceived them, he wiped his glasses and offered a weary smile. You wish to see me again, monsieur? Yes, Sir Harold, Poirot replied. You secured the west wing at 10, yet you also sign out the chapel key when you administer late study sessions. You possess both motive to shield long-buried school secrets and means to slip through these passages unnoticed. The master's hands trembled as he removed the keyring from his belt. I confess, I fear the repercussions of Edward's findings. He stumbled upon ancient school records documents proving a cover-up of a student's death 50 years ago. And you feared history repeating itself, the inspector concluded. Sir Harold's gaze faltered. Edward confronted me about the record's lacuna. He said he would reveal my ancestor's part in the cover-up. In panic, I entered the chapel with my lantern and confronted him. I brandished my key as a warning, but he laughed, and I struck out of sheer fright. A tragic impulse, Poirot said softly. Yet the wound's precision suggests deliberation. He examined Sir Harold's cuff for mud and found none. However, you wear a ring bearing no lily. Your lantern smudges match those in the chapel, but not the puncture's clean edge. Sir Harold exhaled, relief washing over his features. Then I did not kill him? No, Poirot answered. Your guilt lies elsewhere, but not here. He turned to the inspector. We have cleared Clark, Carter, Cartwright, Harrington, and Sir Harold himself. The murderer must be one who combines anatomical skill, intimate architectural knowledge, and unblemished alibi until now. He smiled thinly. Tomorrow we shall revisit Mr. Peters. The matron's keys may yet hold. The final secret. As dusk fell and lanterns glowed along the quadrangle, Poirot and the inspector departed, leaving Lantern Hill's halls poised on the brink of revelation. and a culprit still in the shadows. Chapter 8. The Keeper of Keys. The dawnlight filtered through the mullioned windows of Lantern Hill School as Monsieur Poirot and Inspector Hamilton made their way toward the domestic wing. Here, behind heavy oak doors and the clatter of pans in the scullery, lived Mr. Peters, the matron entrusted with every key in the school. His domain was a forest of unlabeled hooks and jangling metal, and it was here that the final thread of this tangled mystery might be found. They found him in the key room, bent over a ledger, the size of a hymnal, quill in hand. Beside him lay dozens of keys of all shapes and sizes, brass skeleton keys, slender silver ones, and massive iron billets. He looked up at their entrance, worry creasing his forehead beneath the starched cap of his uniform. "Good morning, Inspector Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, rising stiffly. "I trust you require the key to the basement storeroom next?" Poirot held up a gloved finger. "Not today, Monsieur Peters. We wish to speak of keys you signed out, and those you did not. Please close your ledger for a moment." Mr. Peters hesitated, closing the heavy book with a muted thud. He wiped his hands on his apron and stood before a battered table. "Very well. How can I assist?" Poirot unfolded a small slip of parchment. "This note is a copy of your own entry. Last night, you checked out the key to the sixth form dormitory at 9:45 p.m. You also recorded signing out the chapel key at 10:05 p.m. Yet you assert you fell ill soon after. You were indisposed in the infirmary at that time, were you not?" The matron's face turned a delicate shade of pink. I felt faint during my rounds, yes. I went to see Dr. Harrington and rested in the infirmary. I did not use either. Key again. Inspector Hamilton produced a second document. But here, your log shows another, signature one matching Sir Harold's handwriting initialing. The return of the chapel key at 11 p.m. That was his duty, not yours. How did you permit that? Mr. Peters swallowed. Sir Harold asked me to sign for him in haste. He said urgent candlelight was needed in the chapel. I thought nothing of it. He wrung his hands. He did not return it himself. I didn't think to question why. Poirot paced slowly among the rows of hooks. We have confirmed that Sir Harold's own movement could not account for the puncture wound. And Gerald Clark and Gavin Carter have alibis that check out. Miss Cartwright confesses presence, but no weapon. Dr. Harrington possessed the stiletto, but was elsewhere. The only person with unchallenged access to every key and motive to protect the school is you, Monsieur Peters. The matron's breath caught. Motivation? I have served this school for 20 years. I adore it. Yet you guard its secrets jealously, Poirot said quietly. Edward Langton discovered a list of missing items, stolen heirlooms, documents, and a collection of rare Latin manuscripts once thought lost. You catalogued every key, but you also knew which doors should remain sealed. Mr. Peters' eyes filled with tears. Those manuscripts belonged to my family. My grandfather was the school librarian. When he died, I swore to protect his legacy. Edward found my ledger hidden, section noting the location of the manuscripts in the storeroom. He confronted me last night, demanding to make them public. He said the school deserved honesty. And you feared disgrace, Poirot continued. So you ushered him into the dim chapel under the pretense of privacy. You used the stiletto, not your own, but Dr. Harrington's letter opener. You had borrowed earlier intending only to frighten him. Yet a shove became a strike, and you watched in horror as he fell. The inspector stepped forward. Monsieur Peters, did you clean the blade afterward? She nodded, fragile. I returned it to the headmaster's desk and wiped it clean in. The infirmary sink. I thought I could undo it. She covered her mouth, trembling. I signed the chapel key, returned for Sir Harold, to create an alibi, knowing no one would suspect the matron. Poirot offered a calming nod. The little gray cells solve all, but justice must follow kindly firmness. You had motive, means, and opportunity. The soil on your gloves, the ledger entries, and Edward's threat to reveal your secret manuscripts all betray you. Mr. Peters sank onto a stool, head bowed. Outside, the bells tolled for morning assembly. Lantern Hill School, prepared for another day of lessons, unaware that its darkest secret had just been exposed. In the quiet hush, Poirot and the inspector stood in solemn triumph, their task nearly complete, and the tragedy at Lantern Hill wrought to its final chapter. 9. Justice and reflection. The chapel was hushed as the school bell tolled for midday. Lantern Hill's hallowed arches, once a clandestine corridor of tragedy, now stood as a solemn witness to justice served. Inside, Inspector Hambleton oversaw the formal reading of the matron's confession, while Monsieur Poirot observed from a carved oak pew, his gray eyes reflecting both sorrow and relief. Dr. Harrington, still shaken by the revelation, bowed his head in reverence. The flickering candles, the very candles Sir Harold had brought each night, cast soft light upon the vaulted ceiling, illuminating the choir stalls where formerly only secrets had thrived. Now, under the high arches, truth had triumphed. Messieurs. Peters stood at the lectern, her hands trembling but her voice clear. She recounted Edward Langton's discovery of the hidden manuscripts, his threat to expose her family's legacy, and the fatal moment in which she had borrowed Dr. Harrington's stiletto to frighten, not to kill. Her fingerprints on the blade matched the exact wound upon the young pupil's skull, and her ledger entries proved her orchestration of the false alibis. As she spoke, the gathered teachers and prefects listened in stunned silence. When she finished, Inspector Hambleton closed the matron's ledger with a slow, decisive thud. "By order of His Majesty's government," he announced, "you are under arrest for the unlawful killing of Edward Langton." Gentle hands from the school caretaker guided Monsieur Peters forward. She offered no resistance, her sorrowful eyes meeting Poirot's with a plea for understanding rather than condemnation. After the formalities, Dr. Harrington approached Poirot in a side aisle. "Monsieur, your insight has spared Lantern Hill from endless scandal. Yet I fear for the boy's family. They deserve proper notification." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Indeed, doctor. I will see that his parents receive the truth not. The whispered rumors of a hidden chapel." He pressed a folded note into the headmaster's hand. "This is Edward's final poem draft. Perhaps it will bring them comfort to know his heart in his own words." Outside the chapel, a cold wind stirred the ivy that clung to the stone buttresses. Pearly rain began to fall, the kind that washes the world clean of sorrow's weight. Inspector Hambleton and Poirot walked together beneath their umbrellas toward the quadrangle, where the school's board members had convened in emergency session. Sir Harold, meanwhile, had taken charge of preserving the rediscovered manuscripts. Draped in his academic gown, he escorted 2 librarians through the stack of hidden tomes. "These works," he declared, "will at last be catalogued for all to see. Let the truth of Lantern Hill's history be known." The librarians nodded, reverent as they unpacked volumes of lost Latin plays and treatises on ancient medicine. In the headmaster's study, Poirot and the inspector debriefed with Dr. Harrington. The teacher's silhouette stood by the leaded window, rain sliding down, the panes in lazy rivulets. "Monsieur Poirot," the headmaster said softly, "how can we help the school heal?" Poirot folded his arms, his little gray cells still churning with compassion. "Restore routine. Encourage the boys to return to study and sport. Let their laughter drown out the echoes of this tragedy." He paused, choosing his words with care. "And honor Edward's memory, not as a victim, but as a brilliant scholar whose final act sought to preserve knowledge." Inspector Hamilton looked toward the quadrangle, where students gathered under ponchos, chatting anxiously. "I will arrange for a memorial service tomorrow," he said. "And for the matron, we shall request leniency where allowed her remorse is genuine." As dusk fell on Lantern Hill, Poirot strolled alone along the West Wing corridor. He paused at the dormitory where Edward had lain. The polished wood floor was newly waxed. The little silver violin bridge, engraved now only with memory, rested in a velvet case atop the mantel. Poirot ran a fingertip along the glass, recalling the boy's courage. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, a seeker of truth felled by the very knowledge he cherished. He touched the cold glass and stepped back. Beyond the window, the oak trees swayed in the evening wind. The school, once tainted by a hidden crime, would now stand cleansed by revelation and reconciliation. And though no victory could restore Edward's life, justice delivered with mercy would allow Lantern Hill to turn the page. Monsieur Poirot made his way down the stone steps, the chapel bells tolling softly behind him. In his heart he carried the image of a diligent boy among dusty tomes, his final lesson a reminder that truth, once unearthed, must never be buried again. Chapter 10. Echoes of Dawn. First light of dawn seeped through the tall windows of Lantern Hill's chapel as the assembled school community took their places. Monsignor James read from the Book of Wisdom, his calm voice steadying the grief that hung like mist over the benches. Monsieur Poirot sat near the front, his posture composed yet reflective, while Inspector Hamilton stood at the back, ensuring order. The rain from the previous day had given way to a gentle drizzle, the morning air crisp with promise and sorrow intertwined. When the service concluded, Dr. Harrington stepped forward to address the mourners. His voice, though soft, carried to every corner of the nave. Edward Langton was more than a pupil. He was a scholar whose love of knowledge burned brightly. Though his life was cruelly cut short, his courage in seeking truth has bequeathed us a profound lesson that honesty must prevail even when secrets tempt concealment. A hush followed his words, broken only by the faint patter of rain against stained glass dot outside. Under the colonnade, students and staff gathered around. A memorial plaque depicting Edward's likeness in bas-relief, violin clasped in one hand and a quill in the other. Sir Harold, his normally stern countenance softened by emotion, unveiled the plaque as a wreath of white lily Edward's favorite was laid at its base. The petals glistened with dew, a silent tribute to a boy who cherished both music and letters. Monsieur Peters, escorted by the school's chaplain, stood to one side, her head bowed. She had been granted compassionate leave following her confession, the authorities recognizing her remorse and the mitigating circumstances of her long service. When she noticed Poirot watching, her eyes lifted briefly, meeting his with a mixture of shame and gratitude. He inclined his head gently, a gesture of acknowledgement that, in his heart, forgiveness tempered justice. Inspector Hamilton approached the detective with a nod. "The board has agreed to establish a scholarship in Edward's name," he said, quietly, "to support students of promise in classics and music, ensuring his legacy endures." Poirot's eyes glinted with approval. "An apt memorial, mon ami. Edward sought to share knowledge, and now he shall continue to inspire others." As the crowd dispersed, Miss Cartwright lingered by the plaque, tracing Edward's name with a gloved finger. She glanced up at Poirot, her voice catching softly. "Thank you for uncovering the truth, monsieur. Without you, Lantern Hill might have never known the lesson Edward offered, no matter how painful." Poirot offered a small smile. "Madame, it is I who am grateful. Your candor and sorrow have given weight to justice. Remember, though secrets lie in shadow, the light of truth will always reveal their shape." A stirring in the east corridor drew their attention. Dr. Harrington emerged with a bound. Manuscript, the recovered Latin treatises from the lost collection, now fully catalogued and destined for publication. He paused before the plaque. "Edward would have loved this," he murmured. "The manuscripts, once hidden, will now inform scholars worldwide." A gentle breeze rustled the oaken doors of the chapel as Poirot and Hambleton walked into the courtyard. The rain had ceased, and a rainbow arched across the pale sky, an emblem of hope after sorrow. Inspector Hambleton folded his coat around him and looked at Poirot. "Our work here is done, monsieur. Shall we return to London?" Poirot gazed at the school's turrets, now luminous in morning light. "Yes, Inspector. Yet Lantern Hill has taught us that even institutions must guard against silence's cost. Edward Langton's spirit persists in these halls, a reminder that integrity must guide us, always." They climbed into the inspector's motor car and departed down the winding drive, leaving behind the stone towers and whispering trees. As the vehicle rounded the bend, Poirot allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. A boy's love of knowledge, a community's grief, and the great detective's satisfaction that truth once uncovered had restored. Balanced not far ahead, Lantern Hill School stood poised between past secrets and a future brightened by honesty. And in the hush of dawn, the echo of Edward's final lesson resonated, that the little gray cells, combined with compassion, can illuminate even the darkest of deeds. Chapter 11. Renewal and Remembrance. Days that followed carried Lantern Hill School gently back into its accustomed rhythm. Morning drills resumed on the dewy lawns. Latin declensions echoed through the quadrangle, and the solemn hush of the chapel gave way to hopeful hymns once more. Yet beneath the renewed bustle lay a quiet undercurrent of remembrance, as every footstep and flutter of page recalled Edward Langton's sacrifice. Monsieur Poirot, having lingered at the school to oversee the final formalities, walked the corridors one bright morning with Inspector Hambleton. The air held a crisp promise of spring, though the season remained unchanged. Tucked beneath his arm was Edward's folded Catullus poem, entrusted to Miss Cartwright for safe keeping. "Observe how the portraits greet us," Poirot remarked, pausing before a row of painted headmasters. "A scene to acknowledge that a dark chapter is closed," the inspector smiled. "And yet their austere faces remind us that memory is never wholly past." They passed Sir Harold in the library courtyard, where he supervised two librarians arranging the newly published Latin manuscripts on oak shelves. The headmaster glanced up with solemn pride. "Monsieur Poirot, your guidance transformed despair into discovery. These texts will educate generations." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "Edward's insistence on truth has given us this gift." In the chapel, Miss Cartwright placed Edward's poem in a glass case beneath the memorial plaque. Its flowing Latin lines, once a private admonition of betrayal, now served as a testament to integrity. She stepped back, smoothing her skirts, and allowed herself a small, wistful smile. When she noticed Poirot's reflection in the polished wood, she turned. "Thank you, monsieur, for ensuring Edward's voice endures." He inclined his head. "Madame, he spoke for all of us. His lesson is that knowledge must not be hidden." Meanwhile, the gardener's assistant, Gerald Clark, carefully cultivated a new rose bush beside the rose arches, its petals a soft pink, a living tribute to his friend. When Inspector Hambleton appeared to assess the ground for official planting, Gerald straightened and wiped his hands on his overalls. "Inspector, thank you for your leniency. I meant only to protect my uncle's reputation." Hambleton nodded. "Your honesty aids the healing. Edward would have admired your devotion." Gerald placed a slender stake by the bud. "This rose will bloom each year on the anniversary of his passing." At the edge of the playing fields, Gavin Carter resumed his tennis coaching, his pace measured and his whistle tempered. He stopped mid-lesson when the school surgeon delivered new uniforms to the sick bay, and offered a discreet nod of gratitude. In the gymnasium, the prefects polished their rackets, mindful that the corridors once round which they raced by lantern light had become pathways of peril, and, revelation docked in the headmaster's study, Dr. Harrington penned a foreword to the published manuscripts acknowledging Edward's role in unearthing the hidden volumes. He paused often, pen raised, as though listening for the boy's advice. When at last he set down his quill, he signed the preface, "To Edward Langton, whose quest for truth illuminated these pages." On the afternoon before Poirot's departure, the community gathered beneath the ancient oak that overlooked the school's drive. Dr. Harrington unveiled a bronze bust of Edward, depicting him with violin in one hand and quill in the other. A hush fell as students and staff took their places in neat rows of bleachers. Inspector Hambleton addressed the assembly. "Let this bust remind us that courage lies not in strength alone, but in the willingness to reveal what others wish concealed." He gestured to the bust, its bronze features catching the slanting sun. A murmur of assent rippled across the faces before him. Poirot stood beside the headmaster, quietly surveying the crowd. Little Agnes Cartwright dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Sir Harold's lips pressed in a firm line of pride. Mr. Peters, released from duty, watched with a solemn grace born of remorse and redemption. The ministers of Lantern, Hill their duties entwined with tradition, had learned anew that even the most venerable institutions must bow to honesty's clarion call dot as the ceremony concluded. Poirot and the inspector withdrew to the school. Gates, a motor car awaited, its engine humming softly in the late afternoon light. "This place is transformed," Hambleton observed, adjusting his cap. "Oui," Poirot agreed, gazing back at the stone towers framed by golden foliage. "Lantern. Hill will ever bear the memory of Edward Langton, but also the promise that truth, once embraced, breathes new life into all it touches." With a final nod, Poirot stepped into the car. As the wheels turned on the gravel drive, Lantern Hill School receded into the distance, its spires crowned with light, and the echo of a boy's courageous heart resonated on the autumn breeze. 12. A Testament of Truth. The fortnight following the unveiling of Edward. Langton's bronze bust found Lantern Hill School humming with renewed purpose. The chill of autumn gave way to a crisp clarity in hearts and minds alike. Monsieur Poirot remained on the premises longer than he had intended, for more than one soul sought his counsel on preserving the spirit of Edward's sacrifice. With each day's light stretching a little further into the evening, the school felt poised on the cusp of something lasting and profound. On the morning of the school's Autumn Fair, a celebration of Lantern Hill's bicentennial, Poirot walked the polished stone courtyard beside Miss Cartwright. The air was redolent of spiced cider and roasted chestnuts, while stalls laden with hand-bound journals and botanical sketches lined the cloister. Cartwright adjusted the ribbon on her stall, where she displayed Latin primers annotated with Edwards. "Margin notes. Monsieur," she said, voice soft but resolved, "these primers sell well. The proceeds will fund the scholarship in Edward's name." She handed him a copy, its cover bearing the school crest and his poem printed inside. He would have been proud. Poirot cradled the book. "Madame, he continues to teach, even in absence." His words breathed new life into these pages. He smiled, watching her gratitude. "And you, through your dedication, have given meaning to his final lesson." They turned to find Sir Harold presiding over the history tent, where reproductions of Edward's discovered manuscripts were on display. Beneath glass cases, illuminated script described ancient medical treatises alongside lost Latin comedies. A small crowd masters, prefects, and visiting alumni marveled at the restored volumes. Sir Harold caught Poirot's eye. "A marvel, n'est-ce pas? Edward's discovery has enriched both our archives and our reputation. Lantern Hill stands at the forefront of classical scholarship once more. His eyes glimmered with academic fervor. "Thanks to Edward," Poirot replied. "Let us hope future pupils carry his torch brightly." As they spoke, a sudden hush fell over the fairgrounds. The school band, comprised of sixth-form musicians, assembled beneath the oak where Edward once practiced. Timpani and strings began a solemn arrangement of a Haydn elegy piercingly beautiful in the golden morning light. Students and staff paused, and even the visiting townsfolk stood silent in respect. When the last note faded, Inspector Hamilton approached, removing his cap. "Monsieur Poirot, the town council has requested your presence at the launching of the Edward Langton Memorial Trust this afternoon." He presented an invitation, edged in gold. "You are their guest of honor." Poirot inclined his head. "I am humbled. It seems Edward's legacy extends beyond these walls." Before the afternoon sun dipped behind the western turrets, the school's great hall brimmed with dignitaries. Portraits of headmasters gazed down upon citizens and alumni who had journeyed from across the country. At the dais, Dr. Harrington, radiant in academic robes, opened the proceedings. "Today we establish the Edward Langton Memorial Trust, dedicated to fostering classical and musical studies in communities far and wide. His courage and curiosity have become our guiding principles." He gestured to Cartwright and Sir Harold, who stood flanking a gilded lectern. "And now I call upon Monsieur Hercule Poirot, whose steady determination uncovered the truth, to deliver the inaugural address." Stepping forward, Poirot surveyed the assembly. He cleared his throat delicately, then spoke in measured tones. "Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Langton taught us that knowledge is not a possession to hide, but a beacon to share. Though his life was brief, his influence endures in every page published, every rose planted, and every mind inspired. Let this trust be more than a monument. It must be a living tribute, ensuring that seekers of truth never stand alone." Applause rippled through the hall, mingled with a few tears and nods of solemn agreement. Poirot returned to his seat, observing hope and resolve shining in every face. He realized that the tragedy at Lantern Hill had done more than reveal a culprit. It had awakened the community's commitment to honesty and learning dot as evening fell. And the great hall emptied, Poirot and the inspector strolled back toward the chapel. Lanterns flickered along the path, guiding their steps. The little stiletto lay sheathed in Dr. Harrington's desk, returned to its rightful place among letters rather than weapons. The hidden manuscripts, now published, stood on library shelves for all to read. "Mon ami," the inspector said quietly, "do you think Lantern Hill has truly changed?" Poirot paused beneath the archway, gazing at the carved angels above the door. "Oui, Inspector. For a school to admit its faults and turn grief into generosity is the greatest lesson of all. Edward's spirit lives on, in scholarship, in compassion, and in every truth yet to be told." And thus, as the night enveloped Lantern Hill School, its corridors of stone and shadow bore witness to a renewal born of tragedy, a testament that, when little gray cells and open hearts unite, even the deepest wounds may bloom into hope. Chapter 13. The seeds of tomorrow. The morning air carried a gentle warmth as spring began to blossom across Lantern Hill's grounds. Dew-laden grass shimmered in the pale light, and the scent of budding hyacinths wove through the corridors. Monsieur Poirot, having reluctantly notified London that his services were no longer required at Lantern Hill, found himself lingering by the rose arches where Gerald Clark tended the cherished pink bush he'd planted in Edward's memory. The boy's legacy, once shrouded by grief, now bloomed in every corner of the school. "Mon ami," Inspector Hamilton called, emerging from the mist along the pebbled path. "I believe Miss Cartwright awaits you in the library. She has news of the scholarship's first recipient." Poirot nodded thoughtfully and followed the inspector toward the heart of the campus. In the library's high-ceilinged reading room, shafts of sunlight struck the polished reading tables, and dust motes danced in the air. Miss Cartwright stood before a small gathering of faculty, holding a sealed envelope. Her gray eyes shone with excitement, tempered by reverence. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector," she greeted, her voice steady. "The Edward Langton Memorial Scholarship Committee has reviewed applications from across the country. They've chosen our first scholar, a promising boy named Samuel Wyeth from a town near York. He exhibits exceptional talent in Latin and a rare sensitivity in music." She broke the seal and read the brief summary. Samuel's prize-winning essay on Ovid's Metamorphoses and his delicate violin performances had moved the judges. He will arrive at Lantern Hill this summer, supported in his studies and musical pursuits. A ripple of satisfaction passed through those assembled. Sir Harold, leaning against a tall bookcase, nodded approvingly. Edward himself would have rejoiced. To foster another's gifts was his greatest wish. Dr. Harrington offered a quiet blessing. "May Samuel flourish under our guidance, as Edward did in ours." Poirot exchanged a glance with the inspector. The boy's arrival will renew Lantern Hill's commitment to truth and scholarship. Yet it also reminds us that Edward's spirit persists not only in memory, but in the promise of those who follow. He turned to Miss Cartwright. "Madam, you have borne this burden with grace. The scholarship's success owes much to your dedication." She inclined her head, softly grateful. "I owe it to Edward, and to the belief that knowledge, once shared, multiplies in power." After the meeting, Poirot strolled through the West Wing, pausing at the dormitory where Edward had slept. The room, now refurbished and painted in pale blue, bore a single memento of its former occupant. The little velvet case that had held the silver stiletto, displayed on a shelf alongside Edward's violin. A brass plaque beneath it read, "Edward, Langton scholar, musician, seeker of truth." Poirot traced the inscription with his fingertip, recalling the boy's courage dot in the adjacent corridor. Lights twinkled along the lockers, where Gerald and his uncle arranged seed packets for the school's new botanical club. Students filtered in, eager to select bulbs and cultivate their own gardens. "We'll plant snowdrops at the boundary fence," Gerald explained, offering bulbs to a curious prefect. "They'll bloom at Edward's birthday each year." Poirot smiled, a fitting tribute nature's renewal echoing lives renewed by knowledge. At midday, the school orchestra assembled in the sunlit quad, rehearsing a pastoral symphony. Sir Harold, wielding a conductor's baton with surprising vigor, guided his pupils through the lilting themes. Among them, a slender boy, Samuel Wyeth himself, played a soulful violin solo, his tone rich with passion. Miss Cartwright and Dr. Harrington watched from the lawn, eyes gleaming with pride. Inspector Hambleton stood beside Poirot, his expression content. "You see, monsieur," the inspector said, "from tragedy has grown hope roots deep in truth, flowers bright in promise." Poirot inclined his head. "And this new scholar, bearing Edward's torch, will carry Lantern Hill's spirit into the wider world." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Poirot joined a small gathering in the hidden chapel. The space once the scene of desperate confrontation now served as a sanctuary for contemplation. Candles burned gently on the altar, casting golden light on the ancient angel carvings. Miss Cartwright placed a final offering, a scroll inscribed with Edward's Catullus poem, framed and mounted above the altar. Monsieur Peters, recently reinstated as night guardian after her compassionate leave, knelt briefly, murmuring a soft prayer. She had recovered much of her dignity through acts of service and contrition. Gerald Clark lit the candles, his hands steady and reverent. Sir Harold recited a Latin benediction, his voice echoing among the arched stones. Poirot stood at the threshold, observing the tableau of unity forged from sorrow. Mon Dieu, he whispered to himself, what beauty emerges when hearts align with truth. As the final candle flickered, the little detective allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Lantern Hill, once rent by tragedy and secrecy, now thrummed with renewal. A boy's life had been lost, yet from that loss came a legacy more enduring than any hidden manuscript, a living testament to the power of honesty, compassion, and the unending pursuit of knowledge. And so, as the chapel doors closed on the last light, Lantern Hill's corridors and cloisters settled into peaceful vigil, ready to guide generations yet unborn toward the truths that Edward Langton had so bravely sought and bequeathed to them. At the very dawn of tomorrow. Chapter 14. Twilight's Promise. The horizon glowed in soft hues of rose and gold as Lantern Hill School settled into evening hush. The autumnal breeze carried the scent of turning leaves, and the distant peal of the chapel bell marked the hour of twilight. In the cloistered courtyard, students and staff alike paused in their final tasks, acknowledging that day's end with a mixture of reverence and hope. For beneath this gentle calm lay the promise of tomorrow, one built upon the truths unearthed and the lessons learned. Monsieur Poirot, having risen before dawn for his customary promenade, strolled now beneath ivy-draped arches, his mind reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The school's transformation was a living testament to Edward Langton's legacy. Hidden manuscripts returned to sunlight, a flourishing scholarship, and a community unified by honesty. Yet even the keenest little gray cells must rest, and Poirot's thoughts drifted toward the warm hearth awaiting him at the headmaster's lodgings. He paused by the rose arches, their blossoms now fading but still radiant in the golden glow. Gerald Clark knelt nearby, tending to the final blooms of the season. The gardener rose and offered Poirot a quiet nod. Monsieur, the pink rose you planted for Edward prepares to shed its petals tonight. A final farewell before winter's rest. He gestured to the delicate buds glimmering with dew. May each petal's fall remind us that endings bear the seed of beginnings. Poirot inclined his head in agreement. "'Tis been. And when the petals lie upon the ground, they will nourish the soil, ensuring new growth in spring. So too shall Edward's spirit nourish young minds." Further along, Miss Cartwright stood before a cluster of students, imparting the final notes of a Latin verse. As she guided their pronunciation, she caught Poirot's eye and offered a gentle smile of gratitude. He returned it, knowing her dedication had been instrumental in welding scholarship with compassion throughout this ordeal. Crossing the courtyard, they encountered Sir Harold and Dr. Harrington engaged in hushed conversation. The headmaster held a leather-bound volume 1 of the freshly published manuscripts with a ribbon marking a passage. Dr. Harrington read aloud. "And so knowledge, once concealed, becomes the lantern that illuminates the path of all who seek it." His voice paused, eyes meeting Poirot's with a look of heartfelt thanks. "Edward's words, Monsieur," Sir Harold said softly, "now resonate through every lecture and every whispered prayer in these halls." He closed the book with care. Lantern Hill has become more than a school. It is a beacon. As dusk descended, the lamps within the cloister flickered to life. Lanterns swung gently, casting dancing shadows upon ancient stone. Inspector Hambleton peered from the east wing, removing his cap. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "the local constabulary offers its gratitude for ensuring Lantern Hill remains a safe haven. I believe they will maintain nightly patrols until winter." Poirot smiled benignly. "Assurance brings comfort, Inspector. Yet it is the vigilance of the school community that secures its tranquility." They paused at the chapel door, where Monsieur Peters stood in the threshold, holding a single white candle. Her uniform no longer bore the stiff starched cap but a simple shawl of humility. She offered the candle to Poirot. "Will you light this, monsieur?" To illuminate the altar tonight? It is my honor to serve Lantern Hill once more. Touched by her sincerity, Poirot accepted the candle and stepped within. The chapel, bathed now in lantern glow, seemed to breathe with the echoes of past sorrow and present resolve. He approached the altar once, the site of Edward's tragedy, now consecrated by shared grief and redemption, and lit the candle. Its flame danced in the polished brass holder, sending tendrils of light through the stained glass, painting the walls with color and hope. Outside, students gathered on benches, some clutching lanterns of their own, awaiting the customary twilight. Reflection. Dr. Harrington raised his hand, and in measured tones he spoke. Tonight, we remember not only the loss that once darkened these halls, but the truth that restored our faith. Let every candle lit this eve be a vow to seek knowledge fearlessly, and to honor honesty above all. A hush fell, broken only by the soft rustle of paper as each student lit a candle from Poirot's flame. Lantern Hill's courtyard, visible through the chapel windows, glowed like a constellation of earthly stars. Poirot, standing among the flickering lights, felt the full circle of the school's journey, from the shadow of death to the glow of communal promise. When the last candle was lit, Inspector Hambleton joined Poirot at the chapel door. "Shall we retire, monsieur? The lamp in your study awaits." Poirot cast one final glance at the candlelit scene. "Yes, Inspector. But let us carry this light with us into every dawn, every lesson, and every heart at Lantern Hill." Together, they walked into the gathering night, leaving behind the softly glowing candles and the gentle murmur of voices raised in reflection. And as Lantern Hill settled into slumber, the promise of truth and renewal lingered in the autumn air, a twilight's promise fulfilled and destined to guide countless tomorrows. Chapter 15. Winter's vigile crisp frost lay upon the lawns of Lantern Hill School when the first winter wind swept in, heralding long nights and hearthside gatherings. The rose arches, once clothed in petals of gratitude, now stood bare, their skeletal frames etched against a pale sky. Yet the spirit of Edward Langton endured, kindled in every classroom, corridor, and warm lantern-lit chamber. In this season of reflection, Lantern Hill prepared for its annual winter vigil, a ceremony born of tragedy but transformed into a celebration of truth and remembrance. Monsieur Poirot, his overcoat buttoned high against the chill, arrived at the chapel just before dusk. The stone path was lined with lanterns, bearing Edward's crest and morning glories, an emblem of hope amid winter's austerity. Inside, Miss Cartwright arranged hymnals on the pews, her breath visible in the cold air. She paused at the altar to smooth the crimson cloth and place a single white candle beside the framed Catullus poem. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Poirot," she greeted softly, her voice echoing. "The students anticipate your opening words." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, your preparations bring warmth to these stones. May the vigil guide us through the long night." The chapel doors opened as the first notes of the organ drifted through the nave. Prefects in wool cloaks and lantern-bearers formed a procession, candles flickering like distant stars. Inspector Hambleton, flanked by Sir Harold and Dr. Harrington, joined Poirot at the front. When all had entered, Poirot stepped forward, his cane tapping once on the marble floor. "Welcome, friends of Lantern Hill," he began, voice grave yet comforting. "Tonight we gather not only to commemorate loss, but to affirm the light of truth that Edward Langton ignited within us. Though winter's darkness may linger, our shared resolve becomes the flame that no shadow can extinguish." Ah! Hush fell as the organ swelled, and voices rose in a solemn carol. Outside, the wind moaned through the buttresses, but inside, the warmth of shared remembrance held the cold at bay. After the hymn, Dr. Harrington approached the lectern to read Edward's final poem, an elegy of trust and betrayal, its Latin, lines resonant as ever in the vaulted space. When the reading concluded, Sir Harold moved to the alcove where a small oak chest stood. Upon its lid gleamed a silver key, engraved with a lily and the date of Edward's passing. He lifted the key reverently. "This key," Sir Harold announced, "was recovered from the chapel after the tragedy. Tonight we place it within this chest as a symbol, a testament that secrets, once locked away, must be entrusted to memory and honesty." He inserted the key into the old oak lock, and the chest snapped closed. In its base lay the bound notebooks of Edward's translations, now sealed in perpetuity. A gust of wind rattled the windows, but inside, no breath was taken until the lock clicked. "Inspector." Hamilton then guided the students in the lighting of 7 candles along the altar rail, each representing a virtue Edward held dear: courage, honesty, compassion, curiosity, perseverance, scholarship, and hope. The final candle, placed by Poirot himself, symbolized remembrance. As its flame flickered to life, a hush deeper than before settled across the congregation. Miss Cartwright stepped forward, her breath steady. "Let us offer a moment of silence for those we have lost, and for the guidance Edward continues to lend us through his memory." Hands folded, heads bowed, even the organ's final chord faded into respectful stillness. In that silence, Poirot allowed himself a private reflection, a boy's bright laughter and Latin lessons, the echo of footsteps. In hidden corridors, the soft shock of real sorrow. Yet he also felt the warmth of renewal. How tragedy had forged bonds of community and turned pain into purpose. When the silence stretched long enough to be profound, Poirot raised his hand. "As the winter vigil concludes, may we carry Edward's light into every corner of Lantern Hill. Outside awaits the first snowfall. Let it cover our paths evenly, a fresh canvas upon which new acts of honesty and kindness may be inscribed." The organ resumed with a hopeful anthem, and the congregation rose. Lanterns were lifted high as the assembly processed toward the chapel doors. The cold air greeted them with hush, and overhead, snow began to fall, each flake a silent blessing. Upon the ground, outside, the students formed 2 lines, leaving a pathway toward the chapel steps. Sir Harold passed small lanterns to each prefect, who then lit the torches surrounding the central courtyard. The flame-bright glow against pure white snow made the school appear as though encircled by stars. Families and townsfolk gathered beyond the gates, drawn by the vigil's promise of shared solace. Inspector Hamilton turned to Poirot, snowflakes clinging to his cap. "Another Lantern Hill tradition, born from adversity," he observed. "It seems the school grows stronger with each trial." Poirot smiled beneath his mustache. "Yes, mon ami. Like these lanterns shining through the snowfall, truth guides us through the darkest seasons. And as long as we remain vigilant, no secret may ever again endanger the light of knowledge." As the vigil drew to its close, the congregation raised their voices in a final carol. Poirot, lantern in hand, joined the refrain. Outside, winter's hush deepened, but within every heart burned the steadfast promise of tomorrow, a promise first kindled by Edward Langton and kept alive by the courage of truth. Chapter 16. The Scholar's First Steps, the Dawn of Early Summer, broke gently over Lantern Hill School, painting the ivy-clad walls in a pale, hopeful light. The air was alive with birdsong and the rich scent of freshly cut grass, as if the very earth celebrated the new chapter unfolding within its walls. This morning marked the arrival of Samuel Wyeth, the first recipient of the Edward Langton Memorial. Scholarship a moment that would unite past and future. Memory and promise. Monsieur Poirot stood on the terrace of the headmaster's lodgings, watching the carriage draw up along the winding drive. Inspector Hamilton, freshly returned from his London duties, joined him with a nod. "He is punctual," remarked the inspector, brushing a stray wisp of hair from his forehead. "A sign of good character." Poirot's gray eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Indeed, mon ami, Edward's legacy finds its living form today. Let us welcome young Samuel." As the carriage door opened, a slender boy stepped down wide-eyed, yet composed. His violin case was slung over one shoulder, and a leather satchel bulged with parchment and books. Sir Harold and Miss Cartwright waited at the bottom of the steps, their expressions warm yet solemn. "Welcome to Lantern Hill, Samuel," Sir Harold intoned, extending his hand. "You stand where Edward once stood, and I trust you will carry his light forward." Samuel bowed respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I hope to honor his memory and the school's traditions." His voice, though soft, held a quiet determination. "Miss Cartwright stepped forward, her smile encouraging. "Allow me to show you to your new quarters," she said. "The dormitory has been prepared just as Edward's was, though with slightly brighter curtains." She offered her arm, and Samuel accepted, glancing back at Poirot with a shy nod as they departed down the West Wing corridor. Poirot and Hambleton descended to the courtyard where Gerald Clark tended the rose arches. Gerald paused his gardening to offer a small gift, a delicate pink rosebud, its petals unfurled in perfect bloom. "For Samuel," he said, "a token from Edward's garden." Samuel accepted the rose with awe. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It seems to glow." Gerald's eyes softened. "Just as Edward's spirit does among us." Poirot placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Monsieur, Edward believed that knowledge is like a rose. It must be nurtured and shared, else its beauty withers in solitude." His French accent lent gravitas to Thedvice. "May your studies here flourish." Inspector Hambleton cleared his throat. "We shall begin with a tour of the school grounds," he announced. "The chapel, the library, and of course, the hidden alcove where Edward first discovered those manuscripts." Samuel's eyes widened at the mention of hidden passages. "I'd very much like to see it." And so they walked, past the quadrangle where the summer fair had once brightened autumn's memory, beneath the oak tree bearing Edward's bust, along the cloisters where lanterns now gave way to gentle breezes. At last they reached the chapel's side door, still unsealed since the winter vigil. Hambleton produced the key recovered long ago, and with a soft click they entered the hush of the alcove. "The manuscripts were hidden here," explained Poirot, gesturing to a narrow shelf above a carved angel's wing. "Edward discovered them by following the riddles of an old ledger. He believed that truth, once found, belongs to all." He bowed. "You, too, now have access to these treasures." Samuel gingerly lifted the slim volumes, reverent as a curator. "I will study them carefully," he promised. Outside, the bell rang for morning assembly. Students gathered in crisp summer uniforms, their chatter fading to respectful silence as Sir Harold stepped onto the dais. He beckoned Samuel forward. "May I present our new scholar, Samuel Wyeth." A burst of applause greeted the announcement, carrying the promise of acceptance and camaraderie. Samuel's cheeks flushed, but he stood tall, his violin case at his side, a symbol of both art and inquiry. Poirot watched from the edge of the crowd as the boy took his place among his peers. He felt a quiet satisfaction. The tragedy that had once cast a shadow now gave way to light, embodied in the eager scholar before him. As the morning sun climbed higher, Poirot and Hambleton sat in the headmaster's study. Dr. Harrington poured fragrant tea, and the conversation turned to the school's future. "Lantern Hill has borne its trial with courage," said the headmaster softly. "Now it emerges stronger, its foundations grounded in truth." Poirot raised his cup. "To Edward, whose sacrifice seeded this renewal. To Samuel, who carries the torch. And to Lantern Hill, ever vigilant in its pursuit of knowledge." They drank, the tea's warmth echoing the collective hope that would shape the seasons to come. Outside the window, swallows dipped in the courtyard, heralding summer's promise, and as the afternoon bells tolled, Monsieur Poirot prepared to take his leave. Yet in his heart, he knew this place would forever remain a school reborn by truth, and a testament to the enduring power of knowledge shared. Chapter 17. An unbroken, circle the golden haze of late afternoon bathed Lantern Hill's quadrangle as students milled about in clusters, their laughter bright against the ancient stone. It was the first anniversary of Edward Langton's passing, a day set aside for remembrance and renewal. Lantern Hill had transformed over the year, but nothing so embodied the transformation as the annual Circle of Light, a ceremony in which students, faculty, and townsfolk joined hands around the oak that stood sentinel at the heart of the grounds. Monsieur Poirot arrived just as the distant bell tolled, its sonorous notes echoing against the colonnades. Inspector Hambleton stood at his side, the two men surveying the gathering crowd. Sir Harold, clad in academic robes of deep crimson, held a scroll of Edward's writings, while Dr. Harrington carried a small lantern, its flame steady and bright. Miss Cartwright, her countenance serene, stood before the oak with Samuel Wyeth at her side, now a confident scholar whose melodies had already enchanted the school's spring concert. Poirot raised his hand, calling for silence. "Friends of Lantern Hill," he began, voice clear and poised. "Today we gather to honor a boy whose life was brief, but whose impact endures. Edward Langton taught us that the pursuit of truth and the sharing of knowledge form an unbroken circle, a chain of light that each of us must carry forward." His eyes swept across faces both young and old, all attentive, all united in purpose. Harold then unfurled the scroll. Edward's final translation of Ovid's verses speaks of metamorphosis, how even in the darkest night, seeds lie dormant, awaiting the sun's return. He read aloud a passage, and as his voice carried, ancient Latin through the courtyard, the assembled breathed in the resonance of hidden wisdom now revealed. When he finished, a hush settled over the crowd, as though the stone walls themselves absorbed the lesson. Next, Dr. Harrington stepped to the oak, lantern in hand. "Let us place our lights around the tree," he invited. At his nod, Miss Cartwright and Samuel lit 20 candles from the lantern's flame, bearing them to low stakes embedded in the lawn. Each candle represented a facet of Edward's legacy: scholarship, compassion, courage, curiosity, and art. When all were alight, Oak's gnarled trunk glowed between rows of dancing flames. Inspector Hambleton guided the students into a single file. "Join hands in a circle," he instructed gently. Hands reached for hands, prefects clasped with first years, masters with their pupils, townsfolk with teachers, until every person formed a living chain around the oak. The chains unbroken. Continuity mirrored the circle of light gleaming at its core. Samuel Wyeth then stepped forward, violin in hand. "I have composed a short piece in Edward's honor," he announced, voice steady. "It is called The Hidden Manuscript." He lifted his bow, and the first strains of a plaintive melody rose, an intricate weaving of minor motifs that spoke of loss and discovery. As the notes curled through the cool air, Poirot felt the ghost of Edward's own music, his haunting passion, vibrate in every heart. When the final note faded, a gentle wind rustled the oak's leaves, scattering petals of white from the lantern-bearing bushes that girded the circle. It was as though nature itself joined the tribute. Miss Cartwright, eyes misted, laid a single rose at the tree's roots. "To Edward, whose seed of truth has blossomed into this community," she whispered. Poirot observed the solemn beauty of the moment, noting how each face reflected both sorrow and hope. He understood that this ceremony was more than remembrance. It was affirmation. Lantern Hill had turned tragedy into renewal, and on this anniversary, The unbroken circle signaled unity through shared purpose. As the candles guttered gently in the gathering dusk, Sir Harold closed the scroll, and in his deep voice intoned a final benediction in Latin. The words, once a private dialogue between a boy and his tutor, now resonated for all. Veritas nos liberabit, truth will set us free. The translation passed quietly through the circle, a promise spoken and accepted. With the benediction complete, the circle slowly dissolved. Students returned to their lodgings, masters to their studies, townsfolk to their homes, each carrying a flicker of flame in hand or heart. Inspector Hambleton approached Poirot, offering a silent nod of respect. Poirot replied with a small smile. The light endures, Inspector. The circle remains unbroken. They stood together beneath the oak, watching as the last of the candles surrendered to night. In the quiet aftermath, Poirot felt a profound sense of completion. Edward Langton's spirit, once silenced by tragic malice, now sang in every lesson, every ceremony, and every act of kindness at Lantern Hill. And as darkness fell, the oak stood radiant with the memory of Lyda, beacon for generations yet to come. Chapter 18. The light carries on. The morning sun rose over Lantern Hill School in a blaze of gold, setting the rose arches and the memories they bore aglow. One final time. On this day of departure, the windows of the West Wing reflected a school transformed by truth and remembrance. Monsieur Poirot, valise in hand, paused at the foot of the main stair, master of ceremonies for this concluding moment. Around him stood Sir Harold, Dr. Harrington, Miss Cartwright, Inspector Hambleton, and Samuel Wyeth, each bearing a lantern lit from the final candle of the winter vigil. In their faces, one saw gratitude, solemn pride, and the quiet joy of a chapter both concluded and ever unfolding. Poirot cleared his throat, fingers steepled before his chest. Friends of Lantern Hill, he began, voice steady and warm. Our journey together began with tragedy and mystery, but has ended in renewal and unity. Edward Langton's quest for knowledge revealed not only hidden manuscripts, but also the depths of our own hearts. Today, as we douse these lanterns, we kindle in our spirits the promise that truth, once embraced, illuminates every path. Each guest set down their lantern in a semicircle before the oak. With a gentle nod, Poirot allowed them to extinguish the flames, one by one, until only the rising sun remained as the courtyard filled with morning buzz, the laughter of prefects, the chatter of visiting townsfolk, the rustle of new leaves, sir. Harold stepped forward. Let these lanterns rest here by Edward's oak, he said. Their light joins that of every student who dares to learn, to question, and to share. May each generation add its own lantern to the circle. He placed a single lantern at the tree's base, its glass pane etched with Edward's crest, and the date of this day. A hush fell, for all recognized that this small ceremony sealed a legacy greater than any single life. Miss Cartwright offered Samuel a folded piece of parchment, Edward's final poem in both Latin and English. This belongs with you now, she said. You are the living testament to his dream. Samuel accepted it as though holding a fragile treasure. I vow to honor his words, he replied, voice firm, and to carry his lantern forward, wherever my studies take me. The headmaster smiled, his eyes misty beneath silver-rimmed spectacles. Lantern Hill shines brighter because of this promise, he said. Let us remember that each seeker of truth must guard it with both courage and compassion. Inspector Hambleton produced 2 envelopes bearing official seals. For the school archives, he explained, handing one to Sir Harold and one to Dr. Harrington. Inside are the original confession, the recovered silver stiletto, and the ledger of hidden manuscripts. May they remind future masters that secrecy may breed sorrow, but honesty brings healing. The headmaster received them solemnly, placing them in a polished box for safekeeping. Poirot watched this final act, satisfied that every loose end, both legal and moral, had been addressed. With the formalities complete, Poirot shouldered his valise and offered a bow to the assembly. "I take my leave," he said quietly. "But know this: Lantern Hill's corridors, once shadowed by deceit, now echo with the light of minds unfettered. Edward Langton's spirit lives in every classroom, in every rose that blooms, and in every lantern that stands ready to shine." He turned toward the school gates, the path before him bathed in morning brilliance. As Poirot walked away, his silhouette framed by the school's soaring towers, he felt the gentle tug of contentment. The little gray cells had served well, but it was the hearts of Lantern Hill, open, courageous, and steadfast, that had delivered the greatest victory. Behind him, the school stirred to life, a living tapestry woven from sorrow and hope, forever carrying Edward's light into the promise of tomorrow. Chapter 19. The Hidden Beacon. Summer term waned, and at last yielded to the promise of autumn's golden light. Lantern Hill School, its ivy now a tapestry of amber and crimson, breathed with the gentle rhythm of study and song. Walkways once marked by solemn ceremonies now shimmered with sunlight and laughter, yet beneath every joyful note lingered the memory of Edward Langton, his courage, his devotion to truth, and the way his quest had renewed the very soul of the school. A week after Monsieur Poirot's departure, Miss Cartwright discovered a letter addressed to her in Edward's elegant hand. It arrived on the windowsill of the classics classroom, folded once, concealed with a lily motif impressed in deep green wax. She carried it to the headmaster's study, where Sir Harold and Dr. Harrington awaited. Their curious smiles softened as she broke the seal and read aloud, "Agnes, if it is my fate to stand beyond sight, let this letter serve as a token of gratitude. You were my beacon when I navigated shadows of doubt. Remember always that friendship and integrity endure even when I cannot." A hush fell over the study. Sir Harold, his tone thick with emotion, replied, "He knew that friendship outlives us all." Dr. Harrington placed a hand over his heart. "His words still guide us." With deliberate care, Miss Cartwright tucked the letter into the velvet case beneath Edward's framed poem, making a silent vow that one day future scholars would uncover this final message. In the weeks that followed, Samuel Wyeth, they called him the living spark of the memorial scholarship, completed his first year with distinction. His translations of Horace's odes, annotated in fine copperplate, graced the school magazine. At every chapel evensong, his violin performances wove through the vaulted nave like a ribbon of light, drawing tears from masters and pupils alike. On the first anniversary of Edward's death, he chose to play the hidden manuscript, Edward's own composition. Lanterns glowed upon the pews, and as Samuel's bow drew across the strings, the music seemed to carry Edward's spirit back into the hall. In that moment, the living and the remembered breathed as one. Gerald Clark, now a steady presence in the chapel gardens, supervised the rose bush he had planted in memory of his friend. Each blossom, pale as dawn, was cut at its fullest and pressed between the pages of an album entitled Edward's Roses. Gerald inscribed beneath each bloom the date it opened and a brief reflection on the friendship it represented. When the album was complete, he presented it to Sir Harold, who displayed it beside Edward's bust and the mounted poem. The three artifacts, rose album, confession scroll, and elegant letter, formed a silent shrine to the boy whose sacrifice had become the school's guiding light. As term drew to a close, Lantern Hill announced the founding of the Langton Institute of Inquiry. Funded by the Memorial Trust and shared by Dr. Harrington, the Institute offered summer fellowships in classics, musicology, and ancient sciences. The inaugural lecture, delivered by a renowned professor of ancient medicine, drew scholars from across the country. In the great hall, Draped with banners bearing Edward's crest, the professor extolled the value of lost knowledge, invoking the story of a pupil who unearthed hidden manuscripts and changed an institution's destiny. Applause thundered, proof that Edward's discovery had ignited curiosity far beyond Lantern Hill's walls. Yet the most profound change remained in the daily life of the school. In classrooms, teachers incorporated Edward's margin notes into lessons. In dormitories, pupils recited Catullus aloud beneath soft candlelight. In the corridors, a simple phrase Veritas nos liberabit was painted above an archway, reminding all that truth sets us free. On the final evening of term, students and faculty gathered beneath the oak that bore Edward's bronze likeness. Lanterns glinted in the gathering dusk, and around the tree formed the annual Circle of Light. Hands joined prefect to first year, master to pupil, townsfolk to teachers, until an unbroken ring surrounded the oak. Samuel, violin in hand, performed a new composition, a gentle sonata whose opening motif echoed Edward's first notes. As the music wound through the circle, petals of white lily, symbols of innocence and hope, drifted down from the trees. Above, as if nature itself paid tribute, Miss Cartwright, her eyes misted, recited Edward's final poem in English, followed by the original Latin. Her voice carried on the night air. Let my absence be but a pause in our tale of discovery. The beacon remains bright in your hearts until all secrets are brought to light. When the last line faded, a hush deeper than before settled. Inspector Hambleton, invited as guest of honor, stepped forward and placed a wreath of winter jasmine at the oak's roots. To Edward, he said, voice firm, whose light endures in every seeker of knowledge. Sir Harold then presented 2 sealed envelopes, one for the school archives, the other for the headmaster's private collection. Within, he explained, are the original confession, the recovered stiletto, and Edward's personal notes. May they stand as a reminder that secrecy may harm, but honesty heals. With the pronouncement, Caius Chapel's bells tolled midnight, an ancient rite signaling both closure and new beginnings. As students blew out their lanterns one by one, Samuel placed the final unlit lamp beside Edward's bust. We leave this light for tomorrow's scholars, he whispered. That night, as lantern-lit corridors fell silent, the oak stood silhouette against a star-strewn sky. Though autumn's chill had begun to creep into the air, the warmth of community and truth held the darkness at bay. And in the quiet, one could almost hear a distant echo, a boy's laughter in the library, the soft click of a stiletto on stone, the rustle of hidden pages turning in eager hands. Lantern Hill's story continued beyond that night, a tale of shadows overcome, of hidden treasures revealed, and of a beacon that would forever guide those who dared to seek the light. And so, in every lecture, every melody, and every brave confession of truth, Edward Langton's legacy lived on, unextinguished and unbroken, lighting the way for all who followed.